The sound that broke me wasn't a shout. It was laughter. A specific kind of laughter, rich and easy, that can only come from a man who feels perfectly secure in his own home, surrounded by his own people. It was my husband's laughter. The platter of honey-glazed salmon felt impossibly heavy in my hands, its weight transferring directly into my bones. The heat from the dish radiated through the ceramic, a warmth that felt like a mockery. Around the table, his family laughed with him, a chorus of approval. The air, which moments before had been filled with the scent of roasted rosemary and garlic, suddenly felt thin, stripped of oxygen. I stood there, a ghost in my own dining room, holding a meal I had spent 3 days planning, shopping for, and cooking, and all I could hear was the echo of his words, bouncing off the walls I had painted and the furniture I had chosen. He had just called me the help, and in the shared amusement of his family, I understood it wasn't a joke. It was a job description. My name is Alana. I am 34 years old. My husband, Marcus, was 37. We had been married for 8 years, together for 10. Long enough for the initial, careful architecture of a partnership to settle into its foundation, to either solidify into something permanent or reveal the hairline fractures that will eventually bring the whole structure down. I am an event planner. My entire professional life is built on the invisible art of making things happen seamlessly. I manage logistics, budgets, vendors, and the volatile emotions of clients who want perfection. I am the woman behind the curtain, the one who ensures the lighting is warm, the music is at the perfect volume, and the champagne is always cold. My job is to create an atmosphere of effortless grace, and I am very, very good at it. I realized in that moment with the salmon platter cooling in my hands, been doing the same job in my marriage for free. The difference is that in my career, my clients value the effort. They sign contracts, they pay invoices. They understand that effortless is the most labor-intensive illusion of all. Marcus, it seemed, had forgotten we were partners. He had started to see me as a vendor, and a complimentary one at that. The inciting wound, like most deep cuts, was delivered with a casual, almost careless flick of the wrist. It was Thanksgiving. Not the real Thanksgiving, but the one we hosted for his side of the family the weekend before, an annual tradition I had inherited and then elevated. His mother, Denise, sat at the head of the table opposite him, a queen surveying her court. I was moving between the kitchen and the dining room, a ballet of logistics I knew by heart. I'd just set down the sweet potato casserole, its marshmallow topping perfectly toasted, when his cousin asked him for another bottle of wine. Marcus gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "Alana can get it. She knows where everything is." I smiled, the smooth, professional smile I used for demanding clients. "Of course." As I turned to leave, Denise patted my arm. It wasn't a gesture of affection, it was a dismissal. "You're just a marvel, Alana. I don't know how you do it all." It was a line she used often, and it always sounded less like a compliment and more like a comment on a particularly efficient appliance. I went to the kitchen, my smile firmly in place. From the wine rack, I selected a nice Merlot I knew his uncle preferred. As I returned, uncorking the bottle as I walked, I overheard Marcus talking to his younger brother, who was trying to help me clear some empty glasses. "Sit down, man. Relax," Marcus said, his voice slick with the performative generosity he reserved for family gatherings. "Let her handle it. She's in her element." His brother hesitated, looking at me. I gave him a small nod, another part of the script. "It's fine. I've got it." As I began to pour the wine, Marcus leaned back in his chair, beaming, a benevolent king. He caught my eye and winked. Then he said it, loudly enough for the whole table to hear. "Relax. You're basically the help tonight anyway." And he laughed. A deep, rolling laugh that his family immediately joined, their faces crinkling in shared amusement. No one looked at me. No one saw the smile freeze on my face, the way my knuckles went white around the neck of the wine bottle. They were all looking at Marcus, the magnanimous host, the funny husband, the man in charge. In that moment, the entire infrastructure of our marriage was illuminated for me. I wasn't the co-host. I wasn't the partner. I was the unpaid event coordinator, the caterer, the sommelier, and the maid. And my husband, the client, was very, very satisfied with the service. This wasn't a sudden collapse. It was the final discovery of a rot that had been spreading for years. The archaeology of our disrespect began subtly. When we were first married, living in our small apartment near Patterson Park, my efforts were a source of pride for him. He'd watch me sketch out menus for dinner parties, marveling at my attention to detail. "Babe, you think of everything," he'd say, kissing the top of my head as I cross-referenced a guest's gluten allergy with the ingredients for the appetizer. He saw the work then. He named it. He valued it. Our first major holiday together was Christmas. His family was coming to our place. It was a big deal, a passing of the torch from his mother, Denise. She arrived with a critical eye, scanning our apartment for flaws. I had spent 2 weeks planning. The menu was ambitious: a standing rib roast, Gruyere and leek bread pudding, roasted Brussels sprouts with pancetta. I'd created a timeline, a run of show, just like I would for a client's wedding. The day was a triumph of logistics. Everything came out of the oven hot and on time. The apartment glowed with candlelight. Marcus was a perfect host, charming and attentive, refilling glasses, telling stories. At the end of the night, as everyone was leaving, Denise hugged him tightly. "You did such a wonderful job, baby," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen where I was scraping plates. "You really know how to make people feel at home. You get that from me." Marcus preened. He wrapped his arm around her. "I learned from the best, Ma." He didn't correct her. He didn't say, "Alana did everything. I just poured the wine." He accepted the credit, absorbed it like a sponge. I told myself it didn't matter. We were a team. His success was my success. That's what a partnership was. But a tiny cold pebble of resentment dropped into my stomach. It was the first of many. Over the years, the pebbles accumulated, forming a solid, heavy weight in my gut. The dynamic calcified. I would plan, budget, shop, cook, and clean for every family event. Marcus would host. His labor was performative and visible. He'd greet people at the door, make a big show of carving the turkey, and lead the toast. My labor was foundational and invisible. The hours of planning, the mental load of remembering who didn't eat pork, whose children were picky eaters, which cousin was newly sober and needed interesting non-alcoholic options. I was the scaffolding. He was the facade. Denise was the architect of this dynamic. She had raised her son to believe his mere presence was a contribution. In her eyes, the work women did was like breathing, natural, expected, and unworthy of comment unless it ceased. She would compliment the food to Marcus. "Son, this brisket is incredible. You've outdone yourself." And he, without a flicker of irony, would respond, "Thanks, Ma. Glad you like it." He started to believe it. His mother's voice became an echo in his own mind, validating his passive consumption of my labor. He stopped seeing the work, and then he stopped seeing me. I remember one summer, we hosted a 4th of July barbecue. It was a massive undertaking. Our backyard in our new house in Hamilton was packed with his extended family. I'd spent a week prepping. I'd created a signature cocktail, set up a s'mores station for the kids, and curated a playlist that spanned generations, from the OJs for the uncles to Childish Gambino for the cousins. I even sourced a small batch barbecue sauce from a vendor I knew in Lexington Market. The party was a hit. People were laughing, eating, dancing on the deck. I was running around, refilling the ice bucket, flipping burgers, making sure the citronella candles stayed lit. At one point, I paused by the drink station to catch my breath. I was sweating, my hair was sticking to the back of my neck, and I had a smudge of charcoal on my cheek. Marcus came over with 2 of his cousins. He didn't notice my exhaustion. He grabbed a beer from the cooler, his chest puffed out with pride. "Man, you know how to throw a party," his cousin said, clapping him on the back. Marcus grinned. "Yeah, well, we like to do it right." We. The word was a lie. There was no we in the execution of that day. There was me, the project manager, and him, the guest of honor. He had slept in that morning while I was brining the chicken. He had been watching sports while I was setting up the tables and chairs. He had been mingling and laughing while I was managing the grill and 100 other tiny logistical details that kept the event from collapsing. I tried to talk to him about it that night, after the last guest had left and we were faced with a mountain of trash and sticky plates. "I'm exhausted, Marcus," I said, sinking onto a patio chair. "I feel like I did that whole party by myself." He was still buzzing from the social energy of the day. He looked at me, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "What are you talking about? I was right there with you the whole time." "You were there, but you weren't with me," I tried to explain. "I was working. You were socializing." He became defensive. His posture stiffened. "That's not fair, Alana. I was hosting. That's work too. Making sure everyone feels welcome, talking to people. That's draining." "Draining?" I almost laughed. "Marcus, I have a spreadsheet for your family's dietary restrictions. I have a budget for every single gathering we host. A budget that, by the way, comes mostly from my income because my business is doing better. I spent 2 hours on the phone last week mediating a fight between your aunt and your cousin about who was going to bring the potato salad, a fight I solved by just making it myself. Do not talk to me about draining." His face hardened. "You're being dramatic. It was a barbecue, not a corporate gala. And you love this stuff anyway. You're the event planner. It's what you do." That was his favorite defense. He had taken my competence, the thing I had built into a successful career, and weaponized it against me. My skill was no longer a gift I shared with our family. It was an obligation. Because I was good at it, it was now my job. My unpaid, unacknowledged second job. And the more efficient I became at it, the more invisible my labor grew. He didn't have to think about it, so he simply didn't. I started to see how this erosion had contaminated even my happiest memories. I thought back to my 30th birthday. He had thrown me a surprise party. It was, I had thought at the time, the most romantic gesture of his life. He'd gathered all our friends at a favorite restaurant in Fells Point. It was perfect. But now, looking back through the lens of this new, bitter clarity, I re-examined the memory. I remembered him asking me, casually, weeks before, for the contact information for my preferred caterer, florist, and bakery, under the guise of helping a coworker. I remembered him using my credit card for the deposits, saying he'd pay me back and then not. I realized he hadn't planned a party for me. He had used my own professional network, my own vendors, my own aesthetic, and my own money to create an event that he could take credit for. He didn't plan my party. He outsourced it to me without my knowledge. The memory, once a warm, glowing ember, now felt like a shard of glass in my mind. He hadn't celebrated me. He had celebrated his ability to use me. The final Thanksgiving was merely the culmination of this long, slow erasure. As I stood there, rooted to the floor by the weight of his laughter, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a dramatic shatter. It was a quiet, clean snap. The sound of a load-bearing support finally giving way. For an event planner, the worst-case scenario isn't a problem you can see. A sudden storm, a power outage, a drunken guest. The worst-case scenario is a fundamental flaw in the premise of the event itself. It's when you realize the clients don't share the same goal. When one person is planning a wedding and the other is just planning a party. I had been planning a marriage, a partnership, an event with 2 hosts. Marcus, I now understood, had been planning a one-man show for which I was the crew. And as I watched them all, my husband and his family, eating the food I cooked, in the house I curated, their faces shiny with wine and satisfaction, not one of them looked up. Not one of them said my name. It was as if the meal had materialized out of thin air, a feast provided by the benevolent magic of the house itself. I was not a person to them. I was a function. I was a resource. I was, as he had so succinctly put it, the help. The sensation that followed wasn't anger. It was clarity, a cold, quiet, and absolute clarity. In my line of work, there's a moment before every big event, a moment I call the point of no return. It's when the contracts are signed, the deposits are paid, and the plan is locked. From that moment on, the event is going to happen, one way or another. All decisions from that point forward are about execution, not strategy. My breaking point was not a moment of emotional chaos. It was my personal point of no return. The decision had been made in a part of my brain that didn't require my conscious participation. The marriage was over. The only thing left to do was execute the exit strategy. I placed the salmon on the empty spot on the table, my movements smooth and practiced. I could feel Marcus's eyes on me, but I didn't look at him. I surveyed the table not as a wife, but as a project manager assessing a completed job. The floral centerpiece I'd arranged was holding up beautifully. The candle wax was dripping at an acceptable rate. The food was being consumed. Guest satisfaction appeared high. From a purely logistical standpoint, the event was a success. "Alana, you didn't get yourself a plate," his aunt said, her mouth full of my bread pudding. It was the first time anyone had addressed me directly in 10 minutes. "I'm not hungry," I said. My voice was even, calm. It sounded like it belonged to someone else, a woman who was not standing in the wreckage of her own life. I turned and walked back toward the kitchen. The laughter and conversation at the table resumed instantly, closing the space my absence had created. They did not need me. They had the food, the wine, the good company. My physical presence was no longer required. In the kitchen, I untied the strings of my apron. It was a simple linen one, the color of oatmeal, a gift from a friend. It was splattered with oil and a bit of cranberry sauce. Evidence of my work. I walked over to the sink and turned on the tap. The water was hot, steaming against my skin. I lathered my hands with soap, methodically washing away the grime and the scent of the meal. I scrubbed under my fingernails. I rinsed and dried my hands on a clean dish towel. It felt like a ritual, a cleansing. I was washing off the residue of a role I would never play again. My purse was on the counter by the back door. My keys were inside. My car was in the driveway. These were simple, logistical facts. I had a clear exit path. I folded the apron. I made the corners crisp and sharp, a final tidy act of service. I walked back to the threshold of the dining room. No one noticed me. Marcus was in the middle of a loud, animated story about a deal he'd closed at work. His mother was looking at him with rapt adoration. I didn't say a word. There was nothing to say. A good event planner knows when the show is over. You don't linger on the stage. You slip out the back while the audience is still applauding. I walked over to the chair where I was supposed to have been sitting, the one that was still empty. I placed the neatly folded apron on the seat. It was a quiet, deliberate gesture. My resignation. My 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately. Then I turned, walked through the kitchen, opened the back door, and left. The cold November air hit my face, sharp and clean. It felt like waking up. I got into my car, the engine turning over with a reassuring hum. I backed out of the driveway, my headlights sweeping across the dining room window. For a second, I could see them all in there, a perfect tableau frozen in the light, a happy family enjoying a holiday meal. It looked beautiful. It looked effortless. I drove away, and I did not look back. The first hour was quiet. I drove aimlessly through the streets of Baltimore, the city lights smearing across my windshield. I wasn't crying. I felt a profound and unsettling stillness, the kind of calm that follows a massive storm. My phone, which I had left in my purse, was silent. They hadn't noticed I was gone yet. The party, my final project, was still in full swing. The thought was strangely satisfying. I had done my job too well. My systems were so efficient they could run without me for a while. I ended up in a 24-hour diner off the I-83, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and weak coffee. I ordered a slice of apple pie. I didn't want it, but the act of ordering something for myself, of being served, felt significant. I sat there and watched the late-night traffic, each pair of headlights a separate story going somewhere I wasn't. My phone finally buzzed around 10:30 p.m. It was a text from Marcus. "Where are you?" I looked at the message. I thought about the 1,000 possible responses, the angry one, the hurt one, the sarcastic one. I chose none of them. I took a bite of pie. It was bland and overly sweet. I drank my coffee. My silence was its own response. He knew what he'd said. If he didn't understand why I'd left, an explanation wouldn't help. The phone buzzed again, and again. A rapid succession of texts. "Are you kidding me? You just left? In the middle of dinner? My mom is asking where you are. Pick up your phone, Alana." The escalation had begun. It followed a predictable script, one I had seen countless times with difficult clients. First, confusion, then indignation. The assumption was that my behavior was the problem, not the circumstances that had provoked it. I was the one being unreasonable. I was the one creating a scene, even though my departure had been the quietest act of my entire marriage. I finished my pie and paid the bill. I left a generous tip for the waitress, a tired-looking woman who had refilled my coffee without my having to ask. I recognized the quiet competence of her service. I saw her. When I got back to my car, there were 3 missed calls and a voicemail. It was from Marcus. His voice was tight with controlled anger. "Alana, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you are embarrassing me. My entire family is here, and my wife just walked out without a word. Whatever you're mad about, we can talk about it later. You need to come back here, right now, and stop being so dramatic." Dramatic. The word hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had spent a decade swallowing my feelings to make his life run smoothly. I had managed his family's petty squabbles, soothed his ego when he felt slighted at work, and built a beautiful, comfortable life for us with my labor and, increasingly, my money. My departure was the least dramatic thing I had ever done. It was a logical conclusion. A contract terminated for breach of terms. I didn't drive back to our house. I drove to my sister's. Maya lived in a small, cozy duplex in Charles Village. When she opened the door, she took one look at my face and her expression softened from surprise to a kind of sad recognition. She had been the steady witness to the slow erosion of my marriage, the one person who saw the cracks Marcus and I pretended weren't there. "It's over," I said. It was the first time I had said the words out loud. They tasted like freedom and grief. She didn't ask for details. She just opened her arms and pulled me into a hug. "Okay," she said into my hair. "Come in. I'll make you some tea." Her validation was quiet, unconditional. It was the complete opposite of the voicemail on my phone. While the tea was steeping, my phone rang again. The caller ID said, "Denise." The next phase of the escalation, recruiting allies. I let it go to voicemail. I already knew what she would say. Her message, when it came through, was a masterclass in passive aggression. "Alana, dear, it's Denise. Marcus is very worried about you. We all are. I'm sure you're just tired. You do so much. But it was a little rude to your guests to just disappear like that. Whatever it is, I hope you'll come to your senses and come home. Your husband needs you. Your husband needs you. Not, your husband misses you or your husband loves you. He needed me. I was a utility." The message was clear. My feelings were an inconvenience, a disruption to the service he was entitled to. The texts from Marcus continued. They shifted from anger to a kind of clumsy negotiation. "Okay, look, I'm sorry if I upset you. It was a long day. We were all just joking around. Come home and we can talk this out. I'll make it up to you. We can go away next weekend. Just us." These were the promises of a client trying to prevent a key vendor from walking off the job. They were offers he would never have made yesterday, when he still believed my service was guaranteed. They were concessions born of panic, not genuine remorse. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he was getting caught, sorry he was facing a consequence. I responded for the first time, a single surgical sentence. "The contract has been terminated, Marcus." It was the language of my profession, the only language I felt he might understand. It was cold, impersonal, and final. His response came back instantly. "What the hell does that mean? This is our marriage, not a business deal." But he was wrong. For him, it had been a business deal for years, one in which he was the sole beneficiary, enjoying all of the services with none of the cost. The final call came around 2 a.m. I was in Maya's guest room, wrapped in a quilt that smelled like her lavender detergent. I almost didn't answer, but something told me this would be the last one. I was right. His voice was different. The anger was gone, replaced by a raw, ragged vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. It was the sound of a man who had finally realized the audience had gone home and he was alone on the stage. "Alana," he whispered. His voice was thick, like he'd been crying. "Please come home." "I can't do that, Marcus," I said quietly. There was a long silence. I could hear his breathing, shaky and uneven. Then he said the line that revealed everything, the single sentence that laid bare the entire broken foundation of our life together. It was his most honest statement. "You really left over a joke? In front of my family?" He still didn't get it. He thought the problem was the joke. He thought the problem was that I had embarrassed him in front of his family. He couldn't see that his family and his desperate need to perform for them at my expense was the root of the entire disease. He couldn't see that the joke wasn't the wound. It was just the moment the wound became visible. He saw my departure as an attack on his reputation. He didn't see it as a defense of my soul. I held the phone to my ear, the silence stretching between Baltimore and wherever he was. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt a profound, bottomless pity. He was a hollow man, propped up by the approval of others and the labor of his wife. I knew he was waiting for an answer, an explanation he could argue with. So I gave him a question instead. A simple, clarifying question that held up a mirror to his own words. "Who is we, Marcus?" I asked, my voice even. He stammered. What are you, we, me, and you, our family?" "You said you wanted to talk about it later, after your family left," I clarified, my tone still quiet. "You said I embarrassed you in front of them. It seems like there are two different groups of people. There's your family, and then there's me. You keep choosing them. So, when you say we, I need to know who you're talking about." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. He had no answer, because I was right. In the conflict between his wife's dignity and his family's approval, he had made his choice. Not just that night, but 1,000 times before. He hadn't chosen them over me. He had simply never considered me part of the equation at all. "You didn't lose me, Marcus," I said, delivering the final line. It was a redefinition of his loss. "You misplaced me, and I'm done waiting in the lost and found." I hung up the phone. I turned it off. The quiet in the room was absolute. It was the sound of peace. The days that followed were a blur of logistics, my own personal event shutdown. I was methodical, efficient. I contacted a lawyer. I separated our finances, a task made simpler by the fact that we'd kept separate accounts, and I had meticulously documented every household expense I'd covered for the last 3 years. My name was the only one on the deed to the house. I had made the down payment with an inheritance from my grandmother before we were married, a fact I was now profoundly grateful for. I hired movers to pack my things while Marcus was at work. I didn't take much. My clothes, my books, my professional files. I left the furniture, the art, the life we had curated together. It felt contaminated. It was the set for a play I was no longer in. When the movers were gone, I walked through the empty rooms of my new apartment. The echo of my footsteps was the only sound. It wasn't lonely. It was resonant. My vindication wasn't a dramatic, triumphant moment. It was a gradual, quiet rebuilding. It began with food. For the first week in my new place, I didn't cook at all. I ordered takeout. I ate pizza straight from the box while sitting on my floor. I went to a small Ethiopian restaurant in Mount Vernon and let someone else serve me. Let them place the injera on the platter. Let them bring me water. It felt revolutionary. My work became my sanctuary. I started being more selective with my clients. I turned down the ones who haggled over my fees, the ones who treated me like a servant instead of a professional partner. I took on a project for a local arts nonprofit, planning their annual fundraiser. The director, a sharp, elegant woman named Lena, treated me with a respect that was like a balm on my bruised spirit. She listened to my ideas. She trusted my expertise. She valued my time. During one planning meeting, she looked over a budget I had prepared. "This is incredible, Alana," she said, looking at me directly. "The level of detail is astounding. You've anticipated everything. We are so lucky to have you." The praise was so simple, so direct, that it almost made me cry. It was the validation I had been starving for in my own home. I was being seen. My work had value. My competence was an asset, not an obligation. The gala was a huge success. We raised more money than they ever had before. At the end of the night, Lena stood on the stage and gave her closing remarks, and in front of 200 of Baltimore's most influential patrons, she said my name. "I want to extend a special thank you to our event planner, Alana Freeman," she said, her voice ringing through the ballroom. "Her vision and flawless execution are the reason we are all in this beautiful room tonight. Alana, please stand." A spotlight found me near the back of the room. I stood up, my heart pounding. The room erupted in applause. People were looking at me, smiling, clapping. They saw me, they saw the work. And in that moment, I felt a sense of wholeness that had been missing for years. I was not invisible. I started hosting dinners in my new apartment. Small ones, just for Maya and a few close friends. There was no performance, no pressure. We'd cook together, laughing in my tiny kitchen. We ate on mismatched plates. Sometimes the food was a little burnt. It didn't matter. The goal wasn't perfection, it was connection. I was no longer serving. I was sharing. I saw Marcus once, about 6 months after I left. I was in the grocery store in Roland Park, deciding between organic kale and regular. I looked up, and he was there, at the other end of the aisle. He looked smaller somehow, less substantial without the backdrop of our home and the adoring audience of his family. He was holding a frozen pizza and a 6-pack of beer. He saw me, and for a moment he froze. I gave him a small, polite nod, the kind you give a former colleague you run into. There was no anger, no bitterness. There was just distance. He walked toward me, his movements hesitant. "Alana," he said, "you look good." "I'm doing well, Marcus," I said. It was the simple truth. He looked down at the sad little meal in his hands. "My mom tried to host Christmas this year," he said, with a humorless laugh. "It was a disaster. She forgot the turkey in the oven. Everything was cold." I didn't say anything. His words weren't an apology. They were just another complaint, another way of pointing out the void my labor had left. He was lamenting the loss of service, not the loss of me. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, my voice neutral. He finally looked at me, a flicker of the old desperation in his eyes. "I miss you," he said. I looked back at him, and for the first time, I saw him clearly, without the filter of love or hope or duty. He was just a man who didn't know how to take care of himself, who had mistaken a partnership for a support system designed exclusively for him. "No, you don't," I said, and my voice was not unkind, just factual. "You miss what I did for you." And with that, I put the kale in my cart, pushed past him, and continued my shopping. It's a strange thing to dismantle a life you built. You think of the years as a loss, as wasted time. But I've come to see it differently. Those 8 years weren't a waste. They were an education. I was enrolled in a master class on the nature of invisible labor, on the difference between being loved and being used. My marriage was the event, and its failure was my final thesis. I learned that you can't be a co-host in a one-man show. You can't be a partner to someone who sees you as staff. Love isn't about grand gestures or perfect parties. It's about the quiet, daily, mutual recognition of each other's work. The work of listening, of seeing, of remembering. The work of saying, "Thank you for the meal," yes, but also for the thought that went into the meal. The work of correcting your mother when she gives you credit for something your wife did. The work of choosing your partner, over and over again, in the small, unglamorous moments where loyalty is truly forged. I used to believe that my capacity to endure was a strength. I could handle it all, so I did. I absorbed the pressure, managed the details, smoothed over the conflicts. I was the load-bearing wall in the house of our marriage. But a wall that bears too much weight for too long will eventually crumble, and it will do so without warning. My strength wasn't my endurance. My strength was my breaking point. My strength was the moment I finally put down the platter, folded the apron, and walked away. My strength was in the quiet, final, self-possessed act of quitting a job I never should have been hired for in the first place. I am my own client now, and I am finally getting the service I deserve. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.